Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episodes of Connections with myself, Cameron Bunch, and my father, Dr. Randy Lane Bunch. Sorry, we're just a minute late. It's kind of funny and a bit ironic that we're late today because today we're going to be going in a different direction than we normally do. Normally, we'll get onto spiritual subject matter and just different biblical topics, but we're going to kind of approach things a different way. Today, we want to we've had our coffee talks and we've had deeper theological talks or talks about the direction of the church or the big church in America or the church globally. But today we want to do something called the shop talk, where we just kind of talk about how we set up our streaming and really then going from there, how is it different from streaming something like this, like that's live and just one-on-one, to something that we're streaming maybe in a church setting or something pre-recorded, and then getting into the idea of why is that relevant today? Why is it important to do today? Is it important for the church to be up on these trends? And so we're just going to hit these things as we go along. And if you guys have any questions after this talk or even during it, feel free to chime in, ask questions, and we'd love to be able to answer, because I think this is a subject that I have been asked to at length and maybe to ad nauseum about this subject matter. And people ask me all the time about tech questions, which I love because I'm always happy to talk about technology. But it's always definitely one of the areas I think that people are falling behind on, because technology is a rapidly growing field and technology just continues to double almost year after year at this rate. And if you're not keeping up with everything, you're going to be so far behind and you just feel lost at that point. And it feels almost insurmountable to keep up on all the new tech and all the new equipment. And so how do you manage this with your otherwise busy schedule already, with family and other things that might be happening, job or just other hobbies? So we're just going to kind of dive into some tech talks or some shop talk, and we're just going to start it off.
Yeah, the good news is, for the beginner, for the consumer broadcaster, just the guy that's kind of, getting his feet wet, Cameron, it's a lot cheaper and a lot easier than it was when you and I started this a long time ago, when you were just a little kid in our church in Vermont, helping to run the media in the back during our service times and running the camera. And then, of course, today you're, very much involved in the electronic side of ministry in a lot of different ways. And not only on staff when you were on staff at the church there in Lincoln, but also in consulting and helping other churches with their systems and so forth. I want to start off, though, like we always do, with just, a scripture, a thought, and kind of some concepts into why media ministry, I think, and I think you believe share these same convictions, is so important today. Let me just read a scripture here, Colossians 4:2-4. The Apostle Paul says, continue earnestly in prayer, being vigilant in it with thanksgiving. Meanwhile, praying also for us that God would open to us a door for the word, to speak the mystery of Christ, for which I am also in chains, that I may make it manifest as I ought to speak. When we talk about open doors, that's a phrase. In fact, our church in Vermont was called Open Doors Church, off of verses like this idea that God would open a door of utterance to us. The Bible says in Revelation 3:7-8, which was our kind of theme verse then, that behold, I've set before you an open door that no man can shut. And the fact of the matter is, through technology today, God has opened a door to the church. But the question is, are we stepping through that door? I would say that before the pandemic, it was here and there. But the pandemic forced the church in America particularly, but really worldwide, to get on the stick when it came to technology. In Paul's day, when God opened a door, it meant, saddle the donkey or the camel or the whatever, hit the dusty trail with your feet, whatever. But today, doors of utterance can be doors of cyber connection, internet doors, telecommunications. For those that don't know, I have a television broadcast, not what you and I are doing right here, even though this is on the same YouTube channel, but we have a television broadcast that's a 30-minute program that airs in 182 nations of the world through a station in Pakistan. And people say, oh, you have a ministry in Pakistan. Well, yes and no. It reaches Pakistan, but it's the television station that beams the broadcast out of Pakistan to the world. It goes into 182 nations. It wasn't that long ago. We had, I think it was 11 million viewers. And in a given month, 11.1 million, I think it was. And then we had 500 and some odd saved in that month, 570 something saved that month. And every month we get these testimonies, dramatic healings, people getting delivered, set free, Book of Acts stuff. And we'll talk maybe more about some of those things when we talk a little bit about the genesis, Cameron, of media ministry where we're concerned, where we started off in Vermont with what we were doing in India and what we were doing there, even in the state. But it's opened up a door and kind of leveled the ground. There was a day where if you were going to be in Christian television ministry of any kind, you had to be invited on a network like TBN or CBN or PTL or otherwise have some kind of connection, either local, regional, or national or international, that would put you out there. But today, because of the accessibility of technology, anybody with an iPhone and a computer can get themselves out there. The question is, do they have something to say? And that's also a good question, maybe to debate about a little bit on this tonight.
And I think one of the things that goes along with accessibility for individuals like us to be able to start something, like you said, with a computer and a phone, is the reality is that people are consuming entertainment. They're consuming video at a rate never before, because as long as you have a computer or a phone, you are able to consume video at a much higher rate. We look at YouTube and it's the second largest search engine in the world. You guys might be thinking, what's the first? Well, it's Google, and they're actually the same company, Google and YouTube, but YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world. When people are curious about learning something, they go to YouTube. How to play a guitar, how to fix your car, how to change a pipe that burst in your house. How do you go to YouTube? And also, you just have the rise of content creation that's rapidly accelerating YouTube's growth, and people always want to see more. They want to see a new video, something that makes them laugh, something that moves them, something that entertains them. And you look at it and it's becoming computer and social media like consumption is becoming larger than ever before, where it's outpacing even television. Most people have abandoned like cable television now and gone to streaming services. Well, streaming services are starting to get abandoned for YouTube and streaming services like YouTube, because it's easier, it's cheaper, or it has a better variety. It has more content that's tailor-made for your interest. You can't go to Netflix and be like, I want to learn about videography. You maybe get one documentary. On YouTube, you get a plethora of videos that pop up at your fingertips. And you look at something like the Super Bowl, which has been hailed as the largest event of the year that Americans flock to, and it boasts these high numbers. I think the last Super Bowl boasted 100 million views, which is nothing to bat an eye at. However, when you look at some of the largest content creators on YouTube, for example, there's a streamer I've mentioned on this podcast before, or I shouldn't say streamer, a YouTube creator. His name is Mr. Beast, is what he goes by. His number one video boasts 300 million views. That's 3 times the audience of a Super Bowl. And that's just on his American channel. He has channels in Portuguese and Spanish and Russia and I think Chinese, Japanese. He has them all over the place. And so he's being consumed at a much larger scale than even things like the Super Bowl, which is, like I said, it's the event of the year that cable news flocks to, and everyone wants to be able to put. I remember one of the Super Bowls, they were advertising that it was more than $1 million for a 15-second spot on the Super Bowl. And I'm sure it's just skyrocketed the rates of that. And it's because everyone knows that they're going to have so many eyes on a screen watching that advertisement during that moment, because it's an event and everyone's going to be gathered and they're going to remember this commercial. Well, now it's changing to where advertisers are starting to go to YouTubers and streamers and saying, hey, can you advertise this content? And you might be like, Cameron, why are you going into all of this? Well, my point is, knowing that this is the way that the secular world is going, Christianity needs to be able to adapt its message. It needs to be able to adapt to the world around it. I'm not saying that we change our message. I'm saying we change the way we approach people, that we change the way that we fish. Maybe it was great to have a string and a wooden stick at one point to fish with, but eventually you got to get nets and be able to haul in a lot more. You need to know where the fish are going to be. Maybe it started with like one worm, but all of a sudden you find out if you drop a whole plump full of like worms into the ocean, a bunch of fish in school are just going to swim up and like start devouring them, and you can lower your net there. And I think the reality is that as culture changes and the secular world changes and people start consuming entertainment in a different way, if Christianity doesn't move to that sector, if they don't move to that sphere of influence, there's going to be a whole generation of individuals that are lost to Christianity, that are never going to be known about the Bible or Jesus or any of these figures, because they're too obsessed with this sphere. And so we as Christians, I think, have an obligation and a responsibility to become literate in this field so that we can greater impact that generation, that sphere of influence.
Yeah. And, John Wesley, who brought revival to Great Britain, and his brother Charles wrote so many of the great hymns that the church still sings to this day. In fact, one of Hillsong's songs, I found out I always thought it was such a great song, found out it was written by Charles Wesley. They just put it to a different set of music. Anyway, he preached in his lifetime 40,000 sermons. Every one of them conveyed him to the church or location he preached at via a horse. He went by horse. To not get into the digital media world today, if you're serious about reaching the world, would be tantamount to going back to the horse that John Wesley wrote, rather than driving in a vehicle or getting on a plane or using the advanced, transportation methods we have today. I don't think John Wesley, were he alive today, would be, stabling a horse. He would have whatever vehicle or mode of transportation would get him there to make him the most efficient in reaching the world. And, it's great that, we wax romantic about the good old days, whatever. But the fact of the matter is, it always seems to me, Cameron, the church is always a day late, a dollar short in implementing the things that are emerging, whether it's new technologies or methods or whatever. And then when they do it poorly. And, I've ranted already plenty on this channel about some of the YouTube channels that I feel are destructive to the body of Christ, because these quote unquote, what they call themselves discernment ministries, are just very highly critical of other men of God who are actually doing something for Jesus. But the fact of the matter is, it is an audience and an opportunity that we absolutely cannot ignore, nor should we, I think we'll be held accountable for not utilizing the technologies that God has so readily and easily placed into our hands. And the great thing is, again, going back to what I said before, not only is it cheaper, not only is it more accessible, but you don't have to have a degree from UCLA, film production school to be able to do this stuff. I mean, again, like you said, watch a few YouTube videos. When I started, Cameron, back in, it would have been the 90s and then the early 2000s, when I started getting into media ministry. And back then, this was in the days when it first started, we literally used, it's embarrassing to say, we used a camcorder, like the kind you throw a VHS tape into. And I had your older brother, because you were too little, he was 9, aim it in my general direction. And I began preaching the subject of healing, and we would take those VHS tapes and find a way to somehow convert them over to digital media and then put those on DVDs. And we edited the stuff ourselves. It was real primitive. We weren't even using any of the nice software they have available for that now. Some kind of really, primitive, probably came with the desktop computer you bought, software that enables us to do nonlinear editing on some level with, titles and lower thirds and stuff like that to have our scriptures up there.
Probably a prehistoric version of Windows Movie Maker.
Yeah, something like that. And then, then we put it on DVDs and send it around Vermont. We're on public access. And then, of course, came the day when we sent those same broadcasts over to India and began to see tremendous results, people getting healed. But just the steps we had to take, film it, transfer the tape. Then when we got the Sony camera that we used in Vermont, it was really nice quality camera then, probably about, somewhere between $2,000 to $3,000 camera that filmed in the micro cassette tapes. And then, we'd put those out, take those out. Actually, you'd plug it in with what was that? Firewire, I think they called it back then. Mm-hmm. And then you would transfer it digitally onto your computer and edit it, same deal. And you had to wait for it to transfer, of course. And I mean, a lot of processes is what I'm saying. And today, you plug your phone into your computer, transfer that video over. It might take a while, especially if you do it in a high quality 4K or something like that. It's going to take a little while to get over into your computer, but throw it on your Final Cut Pro, edit it, with tons of resources from various companies like, Motion Array, Digital Juice, have beautiful background royalty-free music by companies like Artlist, Epidemic Sound. There's just so much by way of resource available to us today to make anybody that gives themselves a little bit of time to learn their craft can make them look like, a well-schooled film producer, and do a real good quality product, which I think if the church is going to do it, they need to do it with excellence. And so there's no reason why, if a person feels they have a message and has something to share, why would you just share it to, your one or two or three friends? Fine, do it that way, but film the thing, edit it, put it out there with good quality, and get it out there on your Facebook page, or get it out there on whatever, YouTube, or whatever, social media you want to, and have quadruple, I mean, tenfold, hundredfold, thousandfold the impact.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we also have to get accustomed to is approaching different mediums in different ways. Because I think, for example, you talked about how growing up, or I should say when I was growing up, not when you were, when I was growing up, you were doing different types of media when you were doing the videos at the coffee table. I still remember because my library teacher in kindergarten would always tell me all the time, hey, I saw your dad on TV again today. I saw your dad on TV again today. And I didn't think anything of it at the time. I was like, yeah, that's just normal. And because I remember I went to a couple of the studio recordings that you did at Public Broadcasting a couple times to drop them off or whatever.
Right.
And I didn't realize that was a very different thing that day. But I mean, all the way through high school, I also had that when you were writing in the newspaper.
Yep.
And I think that we need to become accustomed of where are we positioned in the world? Are we in a town where they're going to read their newspaper? Are we in a town where they're going to watch public TV? Are we in a town where they're going to be consuming YouTube at a high rate? Is it Facebook? Is it Instagram? And the reason I bring this up is because each one of those is completely different in how you approach it and how you educate people. If you're doing something on public broadcasting, you're going to seem probably a little more like Mr. Rogers coming on. Hey, everyone. How are you guys doing today? We've got a message for you. And it's going to be a lot calmer, and it's going to be a lot more even keel. When you're writing, it's going to be very succinct, direct to the point. You're writing to convey information, and you're telling the narrative. But then when you go to YouTube, and if any of you have ever watched a YouTube like video, or you watched a YouTuber, as they're called, they come in and they're like, hey, what's up, guys? Today I'm going to show, and it's this very set cadence and rhythm. Versus if you go to Facebook and you watch someone live streaming, it's all different to the different mediums you go to. And it's important to understand the differences between these because, as you mentioned, a lot has changed from the day of you setting up at your like coffee table and having your book there and telling everyone, okay, turn with me to, now they're going to expect a lower thirds. Well, is lower thirds too late? Do you need something to pop up and flash? Do you need a transition to something different? And so I think it's important for us to be aware that it used to require so much of us, and now it requires very little but effort and time. And as you mentioned, there's so many resources available to us. If you're someone that has a computer and a phone, you can use something as simple as a program called OBS, which is Open Broadcast Software. And it's a free software where you can record directly to your computer, different audio, different video, and sync them together and create a video so simply doing that. And there's different softwares that are free for video editing. Some of them are better than others, clearly. I mean, if you get a Mac, you get a basic, what's the one that comes with it? iMovie is the generic basic one. Windows has different ones that are free. And I think DaVinci Resolve still offers somewhat of a free level of the package.
Oh, yeah, they do. You can get, and I'm going to talk about DaVinci Resolve because I think it's one of the best emerging softwares for nonlinear editing out there now. And you can buy now a more advanced, I guess you always could, but you can buy an advanced version of it that is absolutely completely competitive with Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere. And a lot of people are even saying it's better today. So yeah, I mean, it's just amazing what you can do.
So all this is to say is that technology has come a far way. It's incredibly important that we become adept at using it so that we can reach a new generation, a new group, and also just expand your reach. As you mentioned, Dad, that I mean, if you were to try and connect to all the people, for example, that the YouTuber I mentioned, Mr. Beast, did just in America, 300 million views. And then you think of all the other channels that got tens and hundreds of millions of views in different countries around the world. If you were to try and talk to each individual person, you're never going to be able to do that.
No.
You will literally die before you're able to talk to that many people. I mean, it's the difference between how long does it take to count to 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million, 10 million. And eventually, the reality is, I think once you get to like 100 million, you'll spend most of your life counting if by the time you say all those numbers, because that's the reality of exponential numbers.
Yeah.
If you want to be able to reach the people in this world, 300 million people in America, I think it's now just crossed over to 8 billion people in the world.
Yeah, it's going to be 8 billion soon. Yeah.
And so if you want to reach 8 billion people, you're not going to be able to do it without getting involved with technology. I mean, even someone like Billy Graham, he used the technology of his day. I mean, I know people that got saved through his ministry, and it's because it was the Billy Graham radio network, and they heard through there. And so he used radio in his day. I mean, if you had been born in our generation, or I guess my generation, he would have been using YouTube probably. Yep. And there are some individuals that are starting to use things like that. However, I think we, as I mentioned, we need to become adept at using them, because there's a difference between how they used to be done and how they should be done now. And also there's a difference between live streaming, and then there's a difference between pre-recorded, and all of these play into factors and make differences.
Yeah. And, maybe not everybody's going to feel comfortable doing everything. Cameron, I've been doing digital media for long enough where I've kind of got my fingers in almost every aspect of it. We've written books, and so those books are digital. You can buy them on Amazon. So I'm a writer. I love writing. As you said, we do short form content sometimes where, well, you and I don't really so much, but we used to more so. But I do short form content on another website I have called Off-Road Adventures, where I do like an 8 to 10 minute devotional. This is what we would call long form content, where we go for at least an hour. My broadcast at 28 minutes would definitely be considered still, I would think, long form content, certainly. But now you have what they call YouTube Shorts, where it's more of a vertical view, kind of like your iPhone. And, they're doing it for like, it might be 30 seconds, it might be 10 seconds, it might be a minute, but it's definitely short form content. But what does it do? It gives you a nugget to get you hungry to go then to their YouTube channel, which we have a YouTube channel. And by the way, if you want to see what we do on some of our other content, or even see what Cameron and I are doing here, I want to recommend go to our website, randylanebunch.org, randylanebunch.org, just my name. And then under the media link, there is all sorts of media. There's our magazine, that's digital too. We just simply do that. And by the way, we do that on Apple Pages, which is a very simple, it's simpler than Word. It's a very simple program, but it has great magazine templates. So we do, the magazine, but on there, you'll see our YouTube channel. And so go to the YouTube channel. When you go there, why don't you subscribe, like, and comment? That would be a great blessing. But anyway, you can see Cameron and I's broadcast, but then you'll see some of my more long form broadcasts that we do that are like, 28 minutes. What Cameron and I do is even longer than that. But nevertheless, my point is, it's a one camera shot. I've got a camera basically looking at me. I'm basically centered. Usually they talk about the 1/3 rule. You're on 1/3 of your thing. But in my case, it's just more appropriate for me to be more or less kind of like I'm here in the center. And then you'll see lower thirds, which is just, some graphics on the bottom to highlight either our books or magazine, or, tell you who we are, where the websites are. And then when we go to scriptures, we'll have a transition come up. It'll bring up a scripture, then a transition to come back to me once I've quoted the scripture. And it's about 28 minutes. We have an intro and an exit, but it'll give you an idea of what we do. Now, from week to week, I do a broadcast generally on Monday. I don't do them every Monday. I've done, I think, 156 broadcasts now. So I'm kind of slowing down my content creation on that. But I would say, Cameron, today, it takes, of course, about 28 minutes to film it. But then now, because I have my template kind of set up on Final Cut Pro, I can edit that sometimes within an hour. Then you render it and load it up to YouTube. But within a few hours, I have a broadcast all created and uploaded. And like we said, that's going to go into 182 nations and potentially reach, like I said, 11.1 million or whatever it was. And there's 11 something million anyway. And then, potentially see 100 saved. Like we said, that 1 month, Cameron, 570 something, I think 575 people. We have had upwards of 700 and something saved in a single month. I would say that in all of my ministry combined before I went on TV, I never had 700 people saved. I mean, in all those 40 years together. So 1 month. So I don't, and then the healings, that's another thing. Cameron, when we were in that real primitive set you were talking about, when we first started off with that horrible VHS camcorder.
And the trifold behind you.
Yeah, I had a trifold thing with Corinthian columns on it. You know, what do they call them? Room dividers, because I thought it looked cool. And then I had a fake ficus plant. I had a table, a little table, like a end table I bought at Kmart, and then a chair and that horrible camera. And we began sending those DVDs, because we had to put them on DVDs, send them off to India. And we began to get testimonies. And I put some of them in our book, The Gospel of Saving Power, but just give you an idea. We had a gentleman one night watching this, Hindu man in India, didn't believe in God, didn't believe in Jesus at all. Hindu. He's watching the television program. He's flipping through the channels. He lands on my program and he's going to flip past it, but his remote gets stuck on my program. Has to watch the whole thing, comes to the end of the broadcast. He had some kind of problem with his knees. He couldn't walk. He'd been bedridden for 4 days. Watching my program, all of a sudden I began to pray for the sick. He said, I'd always mocked people that said they were healed through Jesus. But he said, I began to cry out to Jesus, Lord, heal me. He said, I thought it was a dream, but I saw somebody reach out like a hand. I saw a hand reach out and lift me up out of my bed. He said, I thought it was a dream, but he said, 4 days later, I'm still walking. What do I need to do now? So I'm reading this email after he has this experience, and I emailed him back, and he's probably at like an internet cafe back then. This is back in, the 90s. And I lead him in a sinner's prayer, tell him to go to my friends. They're in India, which he does. They pray with him. He gets gloriously born again. But he's healed and then saved through a simple broadcast on a horrible, horrible camera. And then, like I said, we got a little bit more sophisticated, but it wasn't the equipment that did it. It was the message. But we were just using these tools to convey the message. My favorite testimony, Cameron, out of that time is a young girl named Jasmine. She had brain fever, was in terrible torment. The father later emailed me and said, we were, regular viewers of your broadcast. There it was called Kingdom TV. And our broadcast, we sent over there. I don't remember what we called it, manna from heaven, maybe, or something like that. Sent the broadcast over there. They recorded all of our broadcasts. So when their daughter had this brain fever and they were giving her like morphine drips or something like that to control the pain, they brought the TV and VCR to the hospital, played one of the programs. And at the end, when I prayed for the sick, they joined me in prayer. When they opened their eyes, their daughter, who had been in a brain fever, kind of like almost like a coma condition, or not coma condition, but just like in terrible torment and pain. She was sitting with her hands uplifted, praising God. Not only was she healed, but the two people in the adjacent room were healed as well. And that's just from a broadcast done on very primitive equipment by people who really didn't know what they were doing, but just using what tools we could to try to advance the cause of Christ. And God used it marvelously. And he's still, thank God, using it today.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the cool things about, like, a lot of people might think like, well, yeah, but if I do just like online, like ministry, is anything going to happen? Are people going to be affected? But you have testimony right there that people are getting saved. Miracles are still happening. God can still reach people through a screen, and you're still able to touch millions of lives that you otherwise might have not had contact with. And I think one of the cool things is having done that, like you said, and that was like late 90s, early 2000s era. And now you have where it's 2022 now, and you still will do like media ministry, and you've done revivals with people where, because of the technology we have now, you're sitting at home in that very office filming yourself live, and they're projecting it onto a bed sheet in the middle of like nowhere because they got internet connection, they got a projector and a bed sheet, and you're able to do a revival from there. And that's just mind blowing. Like that wasn't possible in Paul's time. It was them going there in person and having to like try and gather an audience and do all these different things. But now you're able to preach from the comfort of your own home. And I'm not saying, please do not mistake me and say that is your only responsibility in life, is to sit from your comfort of your home and send little messages out. No, we are still called to go into the world. We still have an obligation to reach the people around us, interact with our communities, our local churches, all of these things. And I think it's very frustrating when we hear individuals say, well, I'm part of an online church, I never need to be part of anything else. No, you need to get involved with the community. You need to be able to affect those and the lives around you. And I understand if you have different medical like limitations and whatnot, and God understands that. But for the vast majority, I think it's irresponsible for us to say, I can just be a part of an online ministry. I can attend online and never do anything else. No, you need to do something else. You need to be active. You need to participate. But this is just another avenue by which we can do that. And I know there's a lot of information, and we wanted to kind of get into this a bit of, there's a lot of information of like how do I start? Where do I start? And I mean, even if you've been watching our, how we call this more of a podcast, because I think that's the format that it fits better than a sermon.
Yeah.
How we started versus where we are now is different. Neither of us had mics in front of us. Neither one of us probably had really any decent lighting. If you go back to our first one on our YouTube video, our camera quality is worse, our audio quality is worse, our lighting's worse. And it's all slowly, incrementally, you get these things over time.
Yeah.
Because the reality is nobody's going to be able to buy all this stuff up front. Churches know this, individuals know this. You can't just go and buy an expensive computer, an expensive camera, expensive audio, expensive lighting, and just be like, yeah, that doesn't matter to me. I'm just going to go gung-ho with it. Because you need to be responsible. You need to be financially responsible. And the reality is, if your content is there, that you'll slowly build that over time anyway. If you're preaching something that matters, if you're contributing something that matters, you'll see that the audience will pick up, the people will be interested, that it goes somewhere, and you're able to build this stuff slowly over time. And I don't think you need to have something super polished, super beautiful presented, because as I mentioned, like that #1 streamer, and I mention him a lot, and the reason why is because if you see that people are consuming his content, you must know that it's good. If his retention rate on all his videos is over like 40-50%, which is really high for retention, you must be thinking, oh, he's doing something right. And when you go to his videos, and he's said it often in interviews, he refuses to do anything in 4K quality. He doesn't want to do at like 60 frames per second because he doesn't want it to seem polished, because there's something beautiful about the unpolished. There's something attractive to us where something seems authentic. Now, podcasting is a little different of a setting, of course. You're not expecting us to be running around with a camera showing you something fun and exciting. Hopefully what we're talking about is fun and exciting. But so all of these are different. So we can kind of get into how do you start, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to do. You mentioned the Skype crusades that we were doing a while back. And that was really cool. We talked about what we started doing in Vermont with this very simple equipment, got a little bit more sophisticated as we went along. And then, I've been broadcasting on some level for a long, long time. Even when I was pastoring way before you were born, Cameron, there was a local television station that had like a 3-hour morning news show. It was a local station. And it was probably a network affiliate, but they, had the local thing on for 3 hours in the morning, local news. And they wanted to have a 2-minute inspirational thing. And they wanted a preacher to come on and give, kind of a positive, uplifting, spiritual talk for 2 minutes. I ended up with that. So every week I would come in and film 10 2-minute broadcasts for that 2 weeks period. And so that goes back to my 20s, so I've been doing this on and off in some way or another in different ways. So saw the potential maybe a little bit early on. And of course, everybody knows that if you're going to reach people, doing it through media is going to be, the difference was we didn't have the accessibility that we do today. So when we did the Skype crusade thing, what happened was a friend of ours that we broadcast with now said, how would you like to do some Skype crusades? And I was concerned because he and I had done some Skyping, just talking together, and we would lose connection sometimes. I'm thinking, how is this going to work? And sometimes it didn't. But basically, like you said, the formula was they would pick some remote village outside of, in some rural area of Pakistan that really couldn't maybe sustain a crusade. And they would do the worship, they would do the music. They might have even had some other people doing some exhorting and preaching before. But then when it came time for the main message, I would be waiting at home, usually around somewhere between, 7, 8 in the morning, depending on the time of year with the time change, waiting for them to go live. And I would be ready and they would say, okay, we're on now. And I would, we'd click on together. And what was really cool is the setup was, they had a laptop and I'm seeing through the laptop on the other side. The people are watching me up on a bed sheet through a projector coming off that laptop. So they're looking at me up here, but I can only see what I'm seeing out of the laptop. So when we had first come together, I would see them, and some of them are looking right at me in that laptop, and some are looking up there on the screen. I would see them, they would see me, and there was this moment of pause, and all of a sudden, either I would do this or they would do this, and it was just like connection. And here we are on the opposite sides of the flipping world, having a real authentic moment of connection. And then I'd preach the gospel for 30 minutes, pray for the sick, lead people to Christ. And we had miracle after miracle. In 2 years, we saw 2,000 come to Christ that way, but hundreds and hundreds, maybe more healed than we saw saved. And dramatic stuff like people that had cancers going back to the doctor for surgeries, and the doctor saying, "What do you mean you feel fine?" And they would examine them and the cancer's gone. And this was not once or twice. This was every time. Oh, the tumors disappeared. Oh, the cripple was healed. I mean, people that were in black magic for like years and years. The one guy, 39 years. A couple, I think there were 3 guys that were practitioners and teachers of black magic, came to one of those Skype crusades, watched a tumor dissolve off the arm of one of these girls when we prayed for the sick, and they all came to Christ. So, and that was simple media. That was a computer. It was Skype. It was, probably some rickety projector plugged into a simple laptop onto a bed sheet off some building in rural Pakistan. And we saw thousands saved, thousands healed. So again, I'm sharing that because if people think it takes a lot of sophistication, it doesn't. You and I are sitting here right now with a computer on both of our desks, a decent microphone, and an iPhone, which most people have anyway. So what do we need, Cameron, to do what you and I are doing? What's the investment we're talking about? Most people are going to have a computer, right? So what do you think?
I mean, most people have a computer, and the reality is if you have something, for example, you and I love Mac. So we both have Macs. And one of the nice things about Macs with the new update is that you can literally use your phone as a webcam now.
Which is what we're doing.
Realistically, our webcams in the Macs aren't terrible either. Because when you look at, we're both using Zoom to stream this. When you look at what Zoom records at or streams at, it's 720 no matter what. So you don't need a super high-tech camera if you're doing something like what we're doing. But your phone camera is incredible now. If you have a newer phone camera, there are a lot of YouTube channels. There are a lot of video professionals, and even some in Hollywood and professional photographers that make a living taking photos, taking videos off of what you see us talking to right now is a phone. Not only that, if you have an iPhone, can you take incredible video? But the audio capture on your phone is incredible. Now, obviously, it has its limitations because if you're trying to do an action movie, you're probably not going to get great audio from that if you're trying to do something. But if you're just sitting and talking to it, you're probably going to get decent audio because it has a built-in microphone. Every phone needs a microphone to be able to talk to someone. So you have a microphone built into that phone. And not only that, but iMovie also comes pre-installed on iPhones now. You are able to get on an iPhone, record a video with audio, and edit it right there in the palm of your hand. So if you wanted to do all of what we're doing right now,
and then
we're obviously what?
And then distribute it too, right off your phone.
Distribute it. You're able to post it through your phone. And the reality is we're actually just doing this live. So we're taking one step out of the process. And that's one of the nicest things about doing stuff that's live is that you don't have to edit, because anyone who does edited content knows that recording is about 1 to 5% of it. It feels like the rest of it is in the editing, in the music, in the
color grading, all that stuff.
Color grading and all of the after that goes into it. The reality is filming is a very small percentage of it. So if you're doing something that like this that you want to do, get your phone, point it at yourself and go live, and you'll be amazed at the response that you can get by just going live on a phone, on a Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok. TikTok is now one of the largest social medias, and it is one of the most viewed. If you go live on something like TikTok, you're granted probably to garner some type of audience. So if you have a phone, at the most basic roots, you can do what we're doing.
Yep.
Now, obviously, we have a little more equipment. As I mentioned, we don't just use our phones. We have a computer, mostly because you and I both do other work, and we do a lot of work from our computers, whether it is video work or in our professional lives and whatnot. And most people have computers now. I think COVID changed that for most people, that everyone has pretty much a personal computer. So you're able to get some type of basic editing software, like we said. With Mac, it's iMovie, or you can get, like we said, DaVinci Resolve is available on Mac and PC, and they have a free version of it, which it's a pretty top tier editing software that you can get for free. No, you're not going to have all the bells and whistles if you were to get the premium subscription.
And you don't need them to
However,
start.
you don't need much to start with. And then you have small upgrades that you can make along the way. Something simple that most people use, I mean, most creators still use, top end creators, are these cheap little ring lights. I have one behind me. It's literally just a ring and a light, and it projects it. And it's what's causing, if you guys see me put my hand in front of my face in the shadows here, it's a light that's right here. And I can literally click it on and off, and it makes a world of difference.
Yeah.
And they're like $15 on Amazon. And then I have a basic lamp in my corner that I need for this room to have light in general. And I threw a pillowcase over it, a colored pillowcase, to give it a different hue in the room. I have 2 lights behind me on the floor that are just simple little lights that I got off Amazon, and both of them combined were $25. So it was, what is that, $12.50 a piece?
Yeah.
So realistically, all this lighting in this room, if you discount that lamp, because I don't remember how much that was, this being like $15, that being $25, for $40, you have the lighting I have right now.
Yeah.
If you have a basic light in your room and then these lights around, you have $40, you have light. Or you can just use, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I'm using basically my room lighting, and then I have a light coming from the side, a ring light like you do, to give me light on this side of my face. Sometimes the computer will do it, but if the computer goes dormant, then I lose that light off that side of my face. But we've been doing this for a long time, so we know the importance of lighting. What's the it's through the 3 letters. I'm not going to get them in the right order. AVL, audio visual lighting. Those are the 3 things you need to focus on. And so, like you said, with the cameras today, and the cool thing about filming, I've got 2 cameras here. I may show them to you in just a moment that I use in video editing. One I don't use as much now. The other one is my more current, and I use it for my broadcast. I could easily replace that nicer camera with my iPhone, and nobody would be the wiser. You would not know at all. Now, when I first started using these nice mirrorless digital cameras, you could definitely tell the difference between my iPhone because it was not sophisticated enough yet. But with 13 and 14, when those 2 iPhones came in, they had so improved by that time the quality of the image. I've got a 14 Pro Max I'm filming on right now. And the cool thing is I could put that thing on a tripod. In fact, I've got it on a tripod right now, but I could put it on a larger tripod, sit down in my studio where I film downstairs in a little office, and I could put that on not only on video, but on cinematic. And then I can put the f-stop, which just simply means how much light's coming in. You can actually adjust the f-stop on cinematic and drop that down to 2.0, which means you got a lot of light. It's not actually letting more light in. It's digitally replicating the look of it. But what it does is it gives you that beautiful blurred background that sometimes you see when people are doing a high-end production. And I've done that many a time in the field when I'm doing my Off-Road Adventure podcast, and it looks so good. And what's interesting, Cameron, you and I are big on, is it 4K? Is it 1080p? There's a guy I like to watch on YouTube named Peter McKinnon, who I encourage anybody, if you want to learn a lot about cameras and filmmaking and stuff like that, look up Peter McKinnon. He's a Canadian, wonderful presentation. He's a lot of fun to watch. He's very entertaining, but loads of knowledge. But he has a friend named Maddie. And Maddie is also Canadian, lives in the same town. They're good buddies. And they're both in this, they're both professional photographers, videographers. And Maddie made a video, Cameron, of him like just surfing around town on his one wheel. And he filmed some of it in 4K, some of it in 1080p, some of it in 720. He didn't say anything about it when he started it, but he shows you the whole video. And then he comes back and tells you that he filmed it. And you cannot tell really watching it unless you were watching it maybe on a 4K large or 5K, now they have 5, 6K TV screens that were huge, you probably wouldn't know the difference. So the good news for you, if you're starting off, most people are watching content on their phone. So you can start off, like you said, Cameron, 720, 1080p. You don't have to be in 4K world. You can film very simply. And like I said, learn a little bit about video editing. How am I going to do that? Go to YouTube. So simple. And like you said, DaVinci Resolve. And the cool thing is these things are pretty intuitive. The learning curve is not huge. I mean, some jargon you're going to have to learn. We're talking about frame rates and aperture and f-stops and all that kind of thing. But I'm telling you, you can learn this in a couple of afternoons, a lot of this stuff. And then the software itself, you can learn in a relatively short period of time. Let me give you a couple of resources. There's a wonderful it's called contentcreator.com. You and I, Cameron, both love that course. That's why what is it? The 14-day filmmaker course that they do. Wonderful. Now they have one for your iPhone. They just added one for just your iPhone. And so not only that, but they'll teach you how to use DaVinci Resolve. I think they have now that course. They have Final Cut and they have Adobe Premiere. So that 14-day filmmaker, it will give you everything you need to know. In 14 days, you can do anything we're doing, probably. Now, Cameron knows more than I do actually about all this stuff because he's consulted and worked with churches. And so especially when it comes to like larger church production, he knows stuff I don't know. But as far as just the small stuff, it's just so accessible, Cameron. There's really no excuse for anybody that wants to get into this not to do it within the month. They could be doing this easily.
Absolutely. And like I mentioned, what we're doing right now, for example, what you guys actually don't see when you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube is our cameras are a lot higher quality than what you guys end up seeing, because we're doing this through Zoom. Because if we were together in the same location, for those of you who don't know, he's in Southern California, I'm in Northern California, which is why we do this hosted through Zoom to Facebook. And so by the time it gets to you, the video has been compressed, the audio has been compressed a little, but the reality is our video is a lot nicer than we ever need it to be. So you don't need something super nice if you're doing something like we're doing. What is more important, I would say, is the audio. And like you talked about, it's AVL, probably in that order is audio, video, lighting. The reality is most people don't want to stay around if your video or your audio is terrible. If your video is a little blurry, they're like, as long as I can hear it, all right, I'll stay around. And like we said, most people are watching on their phone. So if you're watching on a screen this big, the max resolution you're probably going to get on a nice phone is closer to 1080, and maybe on a worse phone, 720. So when you're watching like this, it's very hard for your eye to distinguish the difference between 1080 and 4K because there's not enough pixels per inch on your phone to determine the difference. So when it comes to video, it's more forgivable if it's not as good, versus audio, you want to be able to hear what's being said. And I do this all the time, and you guys might too. If you're watching different reels on Facebook or a TikTok or a YouTube short, and it's in a loud environment and you want to hear it, what I end up doing is I'll often bring it up to my ear so I can hear what's happening on the video, because I care more about what's being said or the joke that's being delivered than I do the video.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure your audio is good. And there's a lot of cheap solutions for that. Like I said, your camera or your phone on your camera and everything has great audio pickup, but you can pick up cheap mics that plug into your phone that you can literally plug it into your phone and then put a little lapel right here and it'll pick up great audio. Or you can start getting into USB microphones. There are some great USB microphones that are, because everyone thinks you need to have a $200, $300, $400 mic, and maybe like we're using nicer mics because we have them, but a lot of times there are some mics out there. I think Blue Yeti is one of them that's like $80 or something, that's used by a lot of streamers and recognized as a great mic to start out with. And you're like, well, it doesn't sound that great when I plug it in. Well, the reality is there's a lot of softwares, like I mentioned earlier, OBS, that you can put filters on it so it'll take out background noise. Like right now, you guys might be hearing it because we just, as you noticed, there's no bed and couch behind me. So the room is a lot more echoey today because I don't have an object that's enormously cloth to absorb a bunch of sound. You can put filters on to remove different echo noise and reverberations and reflections from the walls. And so you can do a lot of small things like that that just help audio quality and video quality and lighting. And it's very easy to do. Now, as we mentioned, this is a very different setup than maybe if you are in a church setting and you're wanting to set up for a Sunday morning. Now that might look a bit different. So as my dad mentioned, I have worked with a number of churches on different audio and video setups. And oftentimes you're working at a church where you have to have a soundboard and you have to have like someone operating a camera. Well, the nice thing is that as cameras get cheaper and equipment gets cheaper, you can do things very on low budget that still look great. You can do your whole church stage production. I mean, there are plenty of church group pages on Facebook that you can join to get ideas, but you can do some LED strips on the wall and do some cool designs for really cheap. Or you can get maybe one camera maybe instead of trying to get 3 cameras and
Right.
get a bunch of shots, get one good camera that has good quality. And for example, they have a in churches oftentimes, because we're trying to do video and concert, it's a little darker. So I'd recommend something in the Sony line. Canon is wonderful for its color range and detection
Yeah.
technology. Canon is probably recognized widely as the best in color technology. However, Sony beats them out when it comes to capturing in low light.
Yeah.
So in church settings, it might be nice to get a Sony A7C, which is just their A7 version, and the C stands for compact. And the reason why is it's a wonderful camera that picks up well in low light. And so you can aim it at a stage that might be darker and only have a couple spotlights or key lights and some backlighting, and you'll be able to pick up a lot of light to record on. And you can use the audio that you're getting from your pastor's mic and maybe take in, depending on your system, you're either going to take maybe an XLR and convert it to a computer, or if your system has a USB to USB option, you can take sound from your board and then video from the computer. And like I mentioned with OBS, you can set up your system and record it that way. And you can either record it or live stream it with OBS.
A couple other things that you might want to be thinking about getting is, number one, the camera that I'm looking at, my iPhone camera, is sitting on a tripod with a mount that holds a phone. So here's an example of a little tripod. This is not the one, obviously, that I'm filming with right now, but this little desktop tripod, this would not be adequate for what we're doing today, because I have my phone behind my computer and it has to stand up tall enough to be over the top of the screen. So I have one that I bought specifically for this broadcast that I use. It's wonderful. The legs would extend and be a full-size tripod pretty much, but I just use it in the short form with all the legs scrunched up, and it's heavy duty. It's wonderful. It costs, $30. I mean, you can get them for much cheaper than that. But I recommend, I always believe, you're going to get equipment, get good stuff. Buy, what is it? Buy once, cry once, buy twice, or I forget what it is anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, the point is get good stuff, and you don't have to keep buying and buying when everything breaks. So a tripod is important. A little external lighting, like Cameron said, it can be creative. He's got multicolors there. I've got just simply white light here. One of the things, though, that is I hear a lot of filmmakers talk about is there's nothing better than natural light. So like in my daily broadcast that I film, and again, go to randylanebunch.org, look under the media link in the main menu, go to my YouTube channel, all of that, every bit of it is done in natural light, every bit of it. And it works great. I have a light coming through the blinds, but it's not, you don't see the lines on me because of the way I have it set up, but I'm sitting at a desk. It's all natural lighting. It looks really good. And oftentimes you can do that with maybe just one light to catch the shadow side of you. And that's kind of what I've got right here. I've got light coming down from above and just, a light so it very little, but external lighting, a good tripod or two, because you may want one for a phone, you may want one for a camera, whatever. And sometimes, you can get a short one, a desktop one, or, one that stands up tall. So those are necessary as well. And then at some point you're going to, if you get into this, you're going to get, like Cameron and I were talking about, into what they call nonlinear editing software. That's just simply something like DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut Pro, Adobe Premiere. Adobe Premiere was for the longest time considered kind of the industry standard. And it'll work with both Windows or Mac. So that's the advantage of that. Whereas Final Cut Pro is exclusively a Mac product, but DaVinci Resolve, if I'm not mistaken, is both. I know it works with Mac, but I think it works also with Windows, doesn't it? So they have a version of both. But if I were going to start and I didn't have any of those, I would probably go with DaVinci Resolve, because I think it's now kind of becoming the preferred with a lot of people. There's a lot of people, whatever if you ask people, what's the best nonlinear video editing software, everybody's going to tell you what they started with or what they like or what they're, just like cameras. Are you Canon or are you Sony? I will say this about cameras though. Cameron's right. Get a Sony or get a Canon, but go with a major brand. And I'll tell you why. Sony or Canon are both good products. And the reason why is because if you get a Canon camera, here, let me give you an example. This is the camera that I shoot with when I do my broadcast now. This little Rode microphone is wonderful, catches my voice, great audio sound quality. But this lens on this Canon camera is a Tokina lens. It's a third-party lens. It's a wonderful lens. It is they call them a zoom lens. It's really not. It's a 14 through 20 millimeter lens. So it's really more variable a variable focal range lens, put it that way. I usually film on something like 17 millimeters. But the point is, this is a third-party lens that will fit on this Canon camera with an adapter. So Canon and Sony both are not only good in them themselves, but there are third-party lens makers that have made tons of lenses, both for Canon and Sony. Unfortunately, Canon is limiting some of the third-party production now for their cameras, and a lot of people are really upset about that. But Sony and Canon both have, adapters you can use third-party lenses on, and some of them fit directly onto the cameras. It's wonderful. So you can get one camera and get a whole host of lenses over time if you want to, for whatever means you need, or just get one prime lens, one fixed lens, like a good 16 millimeter if you're filming on, like I am, a crop sensor camera, or a 24, 25 millimeter lens on a regular camera. And that's just about right for a headshot type thing. But anyway, we're getting into a lot of detail here, but the point is, with a relatively small investment, particularly compared to, say, a decade ago, you can do this. And if you want more information, message us. I mean, we're not the experts on this. We have a little bit of knowledge, but there's people who know a lot more, and that's why YouTube is so great. We learn our stuff through YouTube and through other people that have taught us. None of this is original with us, but we've learned a little bit because we've invested the time to learn so that we can help other people. And one last thing, I forgot this one, Cameron, we ought to probably talk about storage if you're going to do video. Storage is an issue. Cameron and I were talking about, well, we go about 1080p, which is a little bit lower resolution than 4K. 4K is actually 4 times larger, right? Approximately. Yes. So the thing is, if you're going to film in 4K, you're going to need lots of storage. I have a 10 terabyte hard drive on my desk that is absolutely full because I film everything in 4K. Now, like Cameron said, it's scaled down to 1080p when you put it on YouTube and some of these other formats, even though you can watch it on 4K technically on YouTube. But the fact of the matter is, if you're going to film in 4K, you're going to need lots of storage. So that may be a case for filming, Cameron, in 1080p if people don't have tons of storage.
One of the things I actually say often is let YouTube store it for you. The reason why it's free to make a YouTube channel, you can upload your videos, and maybe you're like, I don't want my videos seen. Okay, make them private. No, you're not going to be able to maybe store it at 4K, but unless you're really planning on doing something with that footage, I mean, really planning to do something. I mean, I did a bunch of Cam's Coffee Corners, a show I did a while back with my church I was working at. And I saved all those through YouTube. I don't have the original files. Am I broken up about it? No. Why? Because if I want, I have the content. I can record them, and I plan to probably in the future to re-record some of them now that I have a completely different setup and things have changed. But the reality is, you don't need to store a lot of that stuff. Oftentimes, if you're creating content for it to be uploaded, what do you do after you've uploaded? Just sits there and rots, and then you waste 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte, 3 terabyte, 4, unless you're doing something where you need to re-pull those graphics, re-pull those videos. And don't get me wrong, some people do. A lot of ministries still need to, and you get to reuse them, or you have to repackage them or reprocess them for a different network or different things. And so if you need it, go ahead and get that. Or you can go with something like cloud storage, which is obviously very cheap nowadays. You can do for like 99 cents a month, have like 2 terabytes or 10 terabytes or whatever it is. So you have a lot of cheap options if you don't want to buy a terabyte or buy a hard drive. I mean, if you do buy a hard drive, there's different ones to buy. You either have HHD drives, which are hard disk drives, or you have SSD, which are solid state drives.
Much better.
So solid state drives are much better. They're also much more expensive. The reason why is a hard drive, a hard disk hard drive, has a spinning disk inside, and that can break at any point. And they break often. Even if you have good companies, the reality is, if you drop that hard drive, it's probably gone. That spinning disk inside is probably busted, and you've lost that information. Solid state drives are exactly what they sound like. They're solid. There's no moving parts, and they're much quicker at drawing information. A hard drive has to spin up and get to speeds and find the data. A solid state drive is has a bunch of transistors across the whole thing, so it boots up super quick, and you're able to get that information quickly, which is why when you go to computers, if you go to an Xbox, if you go to PlayStation, they're all using solid state drives now, which makes the information much more easily accessible. So it's up to you which one you choose. The reality is, like we said, when you're going to buy something, if it's something like a hard drive, a computer, a phone, something that's a larger investment, a microphone, buy once, please. Just buy once. I know, like a camera, it's another buy once. Lights, they're a dime a dozen. You can get Amazon ones that are cheap. Like I said, this ring light is like $15. If it breaks, I'll buy a new one. It's not a big investment. There are big investment lights if you're doing bigger projects, but something like this, you can easily replace. But something like a hard drive, if you have that information and you need it, go the better option and buy it once. Don't lose that information and be broken up about it. Just invest in it. Or like I said, cloud space, YouTube, better areas to store it in versus a hard drive where it's just gone.
I kept for a long time, I kept two versions of everything I produced. I mean, I keep a lot of stuff. And some of it's because it's footage like out in the field that's beautiful, footage that I've taken of wild, the nature, wildlife, whatever. And I want to keep that. I use it repeatedly in some of my productions. But and I want to get to one more thing. Don't let me forget. I want to talk about drones before we quit, just because they're fun. But anyway, the thing about hard drives, Cameron is absolutely right. If I had it to do over again, I would be all solid state. I do have some HHD drives on my desk sitting right now, and I just know any day it could go bye-bye. And then you've lost, all this work that you put in, particularly if you haven't had a chance to use it yet, because sometimes you're storing stuff waiting for the day to use it, and then all of a sudden it's gone. And so you definitely want to make sure you do I think anything you do with excellence. I'm not going to get into the PC and Mac debate because people are on both sides of that, but I will say that just as trends are moving toward media, the trend in computers seems to be moving more Mac friendly in most things. Don't you think that's fair to say? Or do you disagree
I
with
think
that?
it's, yeah. So I will let everyone know I have a bias towards Mac. And I
Yeah,
think it's funny because I was raised on PCs,
me
and
too.
as were you. You started with PCs,
Yep.
and I kind of like started poking and prodding at you when I was in high school because I started using Mac. And I was like the PC guy in high school, and then slowly came to love Mac. And I was like, dang it. And so I started telling my dad, the reality is we have both used PCs for a long time, but the issue we had is that you would have one for a couple years and then you needed to update, and then you would pay the money to
The whole
update it,
computer.
or
Yeah.
what?
The whole computer, not just the
Yeah,
operating system, but
you'd have to update the whole computer, or they get viruses a lot easier, and then your whole computer would be dead and you could do nothing about it. The nice thing about a Mac is I pull it out of a box, I turn it on. No, I don't have as much freedom as a PC does, but it always works the way you expect. My last Mac I had probably about 10 years before I got a new one, and my other one was working fine. The reason I got a new one was because I wanted to do more video editing stuff. And from
yeah.
10 years ago, yeah, technology has changed. My old one was still working with the technology I was using. It was just slower. And I was like, I'm impatient, so I want something newer. And I had the ability to. But I think, as my dad said, a lot of things are starting to trend towards Mac. And that's probably because you have things like the iPhone. The iPhone right now, as far as cell phones go, blows everything else out of the water. Its ecosystem between the iPhone, between an Apple Watch, between a computer works so nicely. The reason that we are able to stream from our phones wirelessly, might I add, we don't have to have our phone plugged into our computer to stream right now. The Mac has a new program on it. They're originally going to call it Sidecar or something. I don't know what they ended up calling it, but the Mac is right now, my Mac is connected to my phone. And if I wanted, I could switch back and forth between either my Mac camera or my phone camera, and they just work. I don't have to program anything. When I go to use Zoom, it'll automatically recognize my computer is using my webcam or my phone. If I go to a program like OBS, I can use my computer and it'll automatically recognize my phone. And so you have something like a Mac that can compete now at PC levels. If you go and buy a PC that's of good quality, you're going to pay around $1,000. Well, Mac starts out at $1,000. Now, I know that's still a big investment, but if you already have an iPhone and you buy a Mac, like a MacBook Air, that the new MacBook Airs are strong enough to video edit,
Yep.
4K video, no problem on. You get a $15 ring light, you're good to go. You don't even need the ring light, but if you want to add things like peripherals, like I talked about. So let's talk about how much a setup is. Let's say you have your iPhone, MacBook Air, $1,000. a ring light $15, add $25 of those colored lights behind me, was at 140. Then you add like a nice audio microphone. Like I said, they have them for $100. You're at a $1,140. $1,000 of that is the computer. Realistically, for what you used to need, I mean, you get a nice Sony camera, a nice Canon camera, you're still going to pay 1,000, 2,000, 3,000.
This right here is about $3,000.
$3,000. And the reality is, unless you're doing something like you do, where you do nicer video editing and you'll do more production rated things, no one's going to know the difference. Me recording on my camera with this lighting, with a mic this mic is actually more expensive. I'm not going to lie. The mic I have right here is a more expensive. This is probably the top tier mic that you see in all podcasts and everything. But the reality is,
this one's about $100.
There you go.
Oh no, maybe it's $199. I can't remember, but it's a very good mic, but it's a lot less money. So yeah, I mean, now, like you said, the technology is so good, you don't have to get the top tier mic. Thank God you have that, because it's such a nice mic. That's what all the pros use. But this one's a Sony, I think what's called Q9, and you can pick it up on Amazon for, a couple $100, $100, whatever it is. I can't remember what, maybe it's 149, and now it's probably dropped in price. But yeah, on audio, as Cameron said, audio is every bit as important, if not more so, than video. People will forgive a little bit of a bad video, but bad audio, if the people can't understand what you're saying, they're done. They're on to something else. And maybe lastly, Cameron, just because it's fun, I want to mention drones. And the reason why I want to mention drones, you think, well, why do I need a drone? You don't. But let me just say this. I'm already putting some of the footage that I've created off my drone, which films in 4K, by the way, on a website whereby I can sell the footage that I've made. I don't know if I've sold anything yet, but you can do that. You can actually create footage and then sell it on some of these, like Winstock or whatever it is. I think Winstock's what I've got it on, if that's the right name. But anyway, what's cool about a drone is I go out of my Jeep. I have this off-roading channel that I do. I can have that drone track my Jeep. So I can be driving down through the Carrizo Plains, out there in the middle of off-roading country, and my drone is following me, filming at 4K. I can have it spin around me. I can have it do all these things. When I bought my drone for $1,000, it was a little bit more than that, but now it would be around $1,000. It films in 4K, as I said, and it's just a simple drone. It's not one of the more high-end drones, just a very moderate drone. But I remember the guy that I bought it at the Apple store, but it's made by DJI, and you can go to DJI's website and find all sorts of different drones they have. I have the DJI AirMac or Air 2. There's a 2S, which is a little bit better. But the guy told me, he said, I used to work in Hollywood, and he said to have a helicopter just do one strafing shot where it's like coming at you from the ground or whatever. He said that was $2,500, and that one shot. So now you can buy a drone and make scores of those in a single day that look every bit, if not better, than what you could get out of that helicopter, a few years back with inferior equipment. So the fact of the matter is, if you want to really upscale your production, do an intro. I did a healing series, Cameron. I think it was a 4-part or 3-part healing series, and I just decided to take it off road. And so what I did was I did an intro and exit using a little bit of drone footage and things like that. I think it was on the exit more, and just flying through the canyon a little bit or following me a little bit. And it's just so cool. And it adds this element of professionalism because it looks so good. And all of a sudden we're talking about getting people's attention, arresting their attention, so they take a look at your stuff more than 5 seconds before they go on to something else. So not only are drones a lot of fun, but they actually up the ante in the production quality of what you're doing, if it makes sense for you to use them. Now, if you're doing like something what we're doing right now, a drone would be useless to you. But if you're doing other stuff, think about down the road, utilizing some of these other, and GoPro cameras, all these different things you can do as action cams to add a little bit of interest to a video. Maybe you're going to do something on a particular topic and you think, what, I want a little bit of what we call B-roll, which, while you're talking, they're seeing a different kind of video. GoPro cameras, certainly iPhones, drones can produce a lot of this B-roll footage that you can put over your voice. And man, you can make this thing look every bit as good as what you would have seen out of Hollywood a decade or so ago. So really the sky's the limit, Cameron.
Absolutely. I mean, as we've mentioned from when I was little and you're recording on like cassette tapes and you had to have like a whole soundboard, mixing board. I mean, obviously depending on how high tech you get your gear, like right now I said I'm using what's called the Shure SM7B. It's connected to something called the Cloud Lift to provide it with more power, and then it's going to a mixer, which is going to my computer. So many steps, so unnecessary. I mean, I like the audio that it produces, but that is still much simpler than what it used to be. And like I mentioned, we can do this all from a phone if I wanted. And here, just to show you, let me see if I can switch my video real quick. So I have a cord right there.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's the difference in camera quality, and I don't know how well it's gonna, like I said, transition because we have the difference between what Zoom will show you and what's the reality. But even like a webcam like this is still not terrible. I don't prefer it, obviously. I
Right.
prefer the phone,
Much
but
better.
you can use something like I said. Some newer laptops come with 1080 cameras on them, which is more than enough to record on. And then you have your lights, so you're just and your the audio that the computers can capture is still great. So you could do it realistically all from a computer if you preferred, all from a phone if you preferred, and then you can add these peripherals. And when we look at where our society is going, to try and tie it back, we see that YouTube, like I said, one YouTuber, Mr. Beast, 300 million views on one of his videos in just America. That's 3 times the audience of the Super Bowl. If everyone is going towards YouTube, shouldn't the church as well? Like I said, we don't change our message, we don't capitulate our values, but we go and reach the people. Jesus went to where the people were. He went to the towns. He went and found people that were working. He didn't always go to the synagogues. Yes, he went to the synagogues to talk to people. Oftentimes, they're the ones that were driving him out of town, but he went to where the people were. He was in the town center. Where did Paul go when he went and preached? He went into the center of town. He went to where the people were. He went to the marketplace and talked to them. He preached the gospel there. Yeah, he also got driven out of town a lot as well and got persecuted a lot as well. But you have a platform like YouTube that has an algorithm that is willing, if you put good content out there, and there's so many YouTubers out there that will post videos on how do you get your videos watched? How do they get picked up? Well, do you have a thumbnail? Do you have a good title? Do you have a good video? And as long as you have those things, you're going to be able to create content that people are going to want to consume and get into a sphere of influence that you never thought you could before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we've gone long enough tonight, but I think it would be good maybe come back at another time, Cameron, and talk about some techniques and things. And I don't know, I probably won't do it on this one, but maybe on the next one that we do, Shop Talk, maybe in a couple months, we'll come back and do another one and talk about more specific equipment. We've showed a couple of things real quickly, but it might be a good idea to break it down and show them and talk a little bit about things like frame rate, aperture, all that kind of stuff, because all that has such an impact on the level of quality of your production. But again, if you go to YouTube, like I said, I recommend watching Peter McKinnon. He's not necessarily a believer. I don't know if he is or not, but I mean, he's pretty clean, so it's not like anything that's going to be shocking or bad, but the quality of stuff that he does is incredible. And he really knows what he's doing. And then, like we said, contentcreator.com. They have that 14-day filmmaker course. Wonderful. I highly recommend. And it's like $45. You just cannot go wrong with that course. I've never seen anything more bang for your buck yet. And then, if you want to know about cameras, just Google stuff. Hey, what's the best, vlogging camera, the broadcast? And of course, you're going to get a lot of opinions, but you'll get in the ballpark of what you need. And like we said, keep it simple. Start real simple. Use your phone, especially if you have a newer phone. Now, if you've got an iPhone 8, no, that's not going to work. You need to upgrade. You need to join the 21st century. But if you have a 13 or 14 particularly, I would say you're in the ballpark. I noticed there was a
I even
difference
have
when I
a
went.
12 and mine's
And
great.
you're doing great. Yeah. So that gives you an idea. If you're in that ballpark, if you're in the newer range of phones, you're going to be fine. And they film in 4K, so you can't fault that. So, start simple, start with what you have, be good with that. If you, and what a lot of these guys say, if you can't do something good with that iPhone, don't buy more expensive equipment because you're not going to be able to do anything with that either. Get good at what you've got and then build on top of that.
Absolutely.
All right. Why don't you lead us in prayer, Cameron, as we close?
Yeah. Lord, I thank you for the technology around us, that you are showing us how to use it for your glory. I pray that you're just giving us a drive to learn, a hunger to get more wise and intelligent in the world that we live in, to be able to utilize the technology, the resources, the software around us to proclaim your glory. I pray that for those out there that are desiring to make a difference in their community and into different spheres of influence, that you're creating this hunger to watch YouTube videos, which may sound strange to some people, but that hunger to learn, the hunger to honor you, that
Yes.
they can learn to operate cameras, that they can learn about audio and video. And even if it's not their area of expertise or what they're used to, that you give them a new passion for it, that you can excite something new in them, that you can get them excited about lighting and key lighting and halo lighting and ring lighting and all these different terms, that you can cultivate that in them, that you're drawing them closer to you, so that you can use them more for your kingdom, that you can use them more to reach communities and people and unreached people's group that have never been reached before. We pray that you're just always drawing us closer towards you, your plan and purpose for our lives. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. One last thought, Cameron. Maybe there's a pastor out there that you're like my age or older, and you're thinking, man, I don't know, Pastor Randy, Cameron, it sounds great, but geez, I'm old dog, new trick kind of thing. Let me encourage you, Pastor, find some young people in your church that not only have the wherewithal and probably already on this making their own videos, but would love a chance to make a difference for the kingdom of heaven. So search out those young people and let them do you a little, let them teach you a little, because they probably be glad to share with what they have. But I find that it's kind of like learning a language, Cameron. If you learn a language when you're young, you know it so much easier and better than if you try to learn one later. I see you guys texting at a speed faster than I can talk. For me, it's not like that because it's a second generation language for me. Whereas you guys who've been raised in this stuff are much more adept at it. Especially, consoles, gaming, right on over to, camera equipment stuff. So find some young people, Pastor. Let them run that ministry for you. Give them the guidelines, give them the parameters, give them a budget, let them spend some money. But you might be surprised what they produce for you, and it might expand into a completely different audience you never knew you could reach. So anyway, that's our 2 bits for this, and we'll come back and do another shop talk, Cameron, probably in a few months, couple months, particularly if something new comes out that we are excited about that we want to share. And next time, I think what we might do is even attach a couple of videos on the end of it when we do the editing and put it on YouTube so they can kind of see some samples of what we've done and get a little bit more of a vision for what they can do with their churches. So, all right, everybody, God bless you guys, and we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.